The Ad hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order. This is a special meeting on a very, very special issue, something that the City of Los Angeles has, in my opinion, has never done before, and that is to have a true intervention RFQ, RFP process so that we can have a partnership with the intervention community of Los Angeles. So this is a very important matter. It's been worked on for many, many, many months by many individuals. And so with that, we'll have the clerk read item number 1. But first, I want to remind everybody, you're all welcome to come and speak to this committee. You need to fill out one of the speaker cards. You get it on the back table by the front door, and you give it to the clerk to my left, and he will give them to me, and I'll call you up in the order in which I receive them. You'll each have at least 2 minutes to speak, so please fill out the public comment cards if you'd like to make public comment on this item or general public comment to this committee. So with that, clerk.
Item number 1, Office of the Mayor to give a presentation in connection with a request for proposals for gang intervention services and related matters.
Thank you.
You bet.
Before you introduce yourself and begin, I want to let everybody know that the item on the agenda is relative to the future release of an RFQ, RFP. So please understand that it is a very delicate matter to speak of something in a public forum like this before it's released. So just understand that some of the questions and some of the answers may be a little bit more generic than you'd like to hear, but nobody, I don't think anybody in this room wants to inadvertently taint any process of the City of Los Angeles. So just understand that. We have a city attorney in the room. Here you go. Thank you. We have a city attorney in the room, and he definitely understands that his responsibility is to speak up if he feels as though we're venturing into an area where it would jeopardize the process, and we will respect that and certainly like to hear the city attorney make sure that we do not do so. Okay? So thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, Reverend Jeff Card, Deputy Mayor for Gang Reduction and Youth Development. It's good to be here this afternoon. I want to just give you an update on our the upcoming release of our gang intervention request for proposal, and a little bit of the background of how this RFP that will be released was developed. First of all, our plan is to release it next Wednesday on November 5th. We will release that RFP that will actually provide for implementation of gang intervention services in all 12 of the designated gang reduction youth development zones in the City of Los Angeles. Those proposals will then be due on Monday, December 15th, is our plan at 5 p.m. A total of $3 million, $250,000 per grid zone will be available through the RFP. And the grant period is going to be for 6 months with being renewable up to 3 years. And then continued funding beyond the 6 months obviously will be contingent upon new appropriations from the council. The plans will be for copies of the RFP will be available on the LA Bavin, LABAVN, LA Business Virtual Network.org, where we've posted all our other RFPs, as well as copies of the community needs assessments that have been done for each one of the 12 areas are actually available on the mayor's home page on the web. The gang intervention service will be focused in 12 geographic targeted areas designated as the grid zones, and those are 77th 2, Baldwin Village Southwest, Boyle Heights Hollenbeck, Cypress Park Northeast, Florence Graham 77th, Newton, Pacoima Foothill, Panorama City Mission, Ramona Gardens Hollenbeck, Rampart Southwest 2, and Watts Southeast. And the focus of the RFP and the intervention strategy will be two-pronged. It'll be community-based gang intervention and also include individualized service provision. And Under community-based gang intervention, we're defining that as violence interruption and crisis response activities that include things like engaging community members regarding gang-related confrontations, working to mediate and diffuse conflict and tensions, identifying gang-involved youth and young adults for wraparound services, and actively promoting peace building with active gangs impacting the designated grid zones. When we talk about individualized service provision, we're really defining that as wraparound services for individuals who are primarily in the ages of 14 to 25 years old who have either through their own admission or the sense of the contractor's admission a desire to leave the gang, who are actually interested in making that transition. And services could include, but are not limited to, not be limited to case management, counseling, tattoo removal, academic and vocational training, and other linkages to programs in the community. Our office reviewed a variety of documents in the development of the scope of services for this RFP, which included everything from the city controller's blueprint for a comprehensive citywide anti-gang strategy to the gang intervention model that was developed by the subcommittee or advisory committee, the community engagement advisory committee of this committee, the Coalition of Community Violence Interruption Professionals, a report by the Advancement Project on November 11th, 2007, a report by the city's legislative office on August 12th, 2008, a report by the Western Justice Center on September 16th of this year, and also an evaluation of the Chicago ceasefire program, which was done by Northwestern University and released on May 2008. And in addition, we convened a working group of evaluators and researchers from around the country, from as far away as Kent State, University of Colorado, Arizona State, University of Missouri, and UC Riverside and USC. So we talked to a lot of people in developing.
So you did all that in one day?
All this was in about 2 or 3 days. All of the contractors who will receive funding from the city will be required to participate in a process and outcome evaluation. As you know, we will be releasing next week as well an RFP for evaluation. And agencies will be instructed to submit client data to the evaluator to ensure impacts on the client and in the community are measured. And there'll obviously be safeguards for confidentiality in that process as well. Proposers will have an opportunity to attend 2 proposers' conferences where they can ask specific questions related to the RFP. Those conferences, proposer conferences or bidders conferences, will be held on 2 separate dates. The first conference will be held at Friendship Auditorium on Wednesday, November 12th from 10:30 to 12:30 a.m. and Friendship Auditorium is located on Riverside Drive, near the intersection of Los Feliz and Riverside. The second conference will be held at the Expo Center in the Community Hall Room on Thursday, November 13th from 1 to 3 p.m. The Expo Center is located right there at the Exposition Park area. And all this information will be in the RFP as well. And then we will release that RFP. We'll have the bidders conferences in as I said, on November 12th and 13th. The RFP will then be due on the 15th of December. We will begin the review process shortly after that. And then in January, we expect to have those reviews completed and in February, report those to council, and then go through the process of getting approval to negotiate contracts and have those services up and running by April 1st of next year. So that is the timeline and the process we've been working on, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the city attorney will allow me to answer.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. On that last note, so that people understand, so we anticipate that April 1st will be the commencement of these new contracts. So therefore, the current contracts, we anticipate that we as a city will go through the mechanisms and requirements necessary to have the current contracts follow through March 31st of 2009.
Yes. For Bridges 2, we will be, with your office, putting forth a motion to actually extend those contracts for 3 months for Bridges 2 intervention work, which would then ensure that there's no gap during those 3 months' time.
Okay. So the reason why I wanted you to point that out is so that people don't get nervous and think that we would be willing to allow there to be a gap in services for 3 months, because currently those Bridges 2 contracts are contracted through December 31st, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. You mentioned in your presentation many of the documents and research and elements of existing experiences, even beyond the city of Los Angeles, matter of fact, throughout the country. So you've gathered a lot of information and a lot of data and best practices, things of that nature, it sounds like, correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Now, with that, the council adopted a version of the intervention, community-based gang intervention model as a city, as a document that the city should utilize and incorporate when we're dealing with intervention throughout the city. Now, when it comes to that model, how do you describe that model being interpreted or incorporated in this document?
Well, I think it's consistent.
Again, being generic.
Yeah, I think it's consistent with that. I mean, as I mentioned, that really the RFP will reflect a two-pronged approach. The community-based gang intervention as being the prong one, and then what we're calling the individualized service provision, which I think the CAC definition called as wraparound services, but it's very consistent with what I think was developed through this committee. So I think it's right along the same lines.
Okay, thank you. And one of the things that I'd like to point out is what we're trying to do in the city more than ever is to allow the various potential contributors to this issue of reduction of violence, reduction of youth delinquencies, things of that nature. In this case, we're talking about the intervention component. What we're trying to do as best we can is incorporate as much of the organic material that we can into policy. And that is something that I don't think government in general has really done a very good job of, not just on this issue, but in my opinion on many, many issues. So I just want to compliment you for taking the time and the energy to actually look through backward and forward on as many of the components that have been brought to bear over a long period of time, but more importantly, the concerted effort that has been evolving over the last few years around this issue in the city. So thank you for doing that, Jeff.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the cooperation with this committee and this. I mean, there's been a lot of people. The list is pretty expansive of all the people that have given their input on this, and I think it is reflective of a lot of different voices. I'm sure once it's released, not everyone will see everything that they hoped reflected in there, but I think we tried to capture as much as we could.
Which leads to my next point. This component of these efforts, is this the end-all or be-all to solving the issues that we all would like to solve when it comes to, the violence in our city, the delinquency of youth, things of that nature, or is this just one component? And secondly, I must ask the second part of that question, have we identified enough resources, we as in the city, have we identified enough resources for this to be the end-all or be-all to get to a final solution?
Well, there's certainly this RFP and intervention by itself is not the end-all, be-all. It is certainly one, in my opinion, one key aspect of the work. I think we, in the mayor's office, we've identified that we think what we really need is a comprehensive strategy that includes targeted suppression, includes prevention to keep kids from joining gang, as well as intervention to actually try and interrupt the violence, reduce the levels of violence in community, and then actually provide the kind of wraparound integrated services to actually help someone who's actually actively involved in gangs find a way and a pathway out of that. But it's one part of a larger strategy. We've also believed that the part of that strategy is geographic in focus. We've chosen to allocate the resources what we thought was the most strategic way in terms of making it targeted in the 12 areas, although still allowing for some resources for outside of the target areas. And, you could argue, do we have enough? Certainly we don't have enough probably in the city as a whole invested right now to deal with the problem at the scale that we have. I think that's part of the reason our office has taken a more targeted strategic approach to see if we can actually get a handle on making reductions in level of violence and reducing numbers of young people that join gangs in these targeted areas as a way by which we can prove that actually the strategy does work, learn from that strategy as we implement it, and then see how we can expand that out to other parts of the city as well.
So without question, the amount of resources that need to be brought to bear on intervention and prevention, and reentry, you can't forget reentry,
Right.
but hopefully the state will come through for us. We are nowhere near having the amount of resources that would make you or I or any one of us comfortable that we finally have the resources necessary so we can really tackle this issue. We're basically dealing with the resources that we have.
That's
but
correct.
that doesn't mean that those are all the resources that you or I or any of us would ask for. We need more, correct?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we did put more, the mayor did put more, and the council agreed to invest, about $5 million more this year's budget compared
Over
to
last
year. That's right. And, in a tough budget climate, I think that wasn't that small or insignificant on the part of the council and the mayor's office to do that. But in the grand scheme of things, and especially when you look at how much money we spend in the state of California on incarceration and how much we spend on the suppression side of things, I would agree that there's a pretty solid imbalance in terms of how we invest those resources.
Yeah, if intervention and prevention were part of a three-legged stool or four-legged stool or eight-legged stool, the bottom line is this leg would probably be one of the shortest.
It would be on the short side.
Resources-wise.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. But not to say in any way that that's a reflection of how important it is. It definitely is one of the lower components that government at every level have actually invested in. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm trying to solve these issues. You mentioned about the outside the gang reduction zones. About how much is going to be brought to bear outside the gang reduction zones when it comes to intervention? And second question to that is, how do you see us as a city moving past that figure eventually? It would have to be budgeted. That's another process that we do usually on an annualized basis here. But how do you see us moving past that and then getting to a point where we feel comfortable hopefully identifying more resources and then bringing it to bear outside the zones as well?
Well, for this fiscal year, we've actually, on an annualized basis, we've targeted $2.4 million for prevention and intervention outside the target areas. That breaks down to about $1.5 million for prevention and $900,000 for intervention. But just as a reminder, that's on an annualized basis, so this is only going to be for 6 months. So we'll be, for the outside the areas, it'll be for $450,000 for this first 6 months, but then obviously in the next fiscal year that will double. It's ends up being we're spending about 85% of the resources on the 12 targeted for prevention and intervention for the areas, and about 15% roughly for prevention intervention for the areas outside the areas of the targeted gang reduction youth development zones. So certainly if we had additional resources for areas outside, we could establish additional gang reduction youth development zones would be one way we could do it. We could also look at, particularly as it relates to intervention, to other areas outside the gang reduction zones. I will note, though, that when we talk about doing intervention in the targeted areas, we've been very clear from the beginning that what we're really, a big part of what we're trying to do in the first prong is to interrupt and to reduce the violence. And so we recognize that there may be a set of, who knows how many different gangs that are active in these targeted areas, but often those gangs have conflict with gangs that lie outside of the targeted areas. And so as part of the intervention strategy, we certainly want intervention groups to consider ways to reduce the violence, to deal not only with the gangs who are actually physically claim territory in those target areas, but gangs that they might have rivalries with that can actually contribute to the violence as well. So I think it will give us a little bit more of an expansive coverage in terms of dealing with gang intervention with gangs that actually are both inside and outside the target areas as well. I think as time goes on, we'll see probably where we have some gaps in the future, and certainly if we had additional resources, then we could target some of those areas.
So even though a lot has gone into it so far, you see it as it's a fluid effort when it comes to how we, or better yet, is this a fluid development as we go forward?
Well, I think, yeah.
And not specifically to the RFP in and of itself, because the RFP in and of itself, obviously, any RFP, any RFQ, you have to have expectations, outcomes, commitments, all those kinds of things. But I'm talking about from the policy vantage point. We don't look at ourselves as having the final solution yet when it comes to how this needs to solidify in the city of Los Angeles for this effort.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're going to invest about $900,000 in evaluation on an annual basis. Part of it's because we want to make sure we know what's going on and whether it's working and whether we're implementing things the way that we had planned to do it, and how agencies are actually doing the work. But also, we've always seen this is a new approach. The challenge is that there's not been a lot of long-term research and evaluation that's been done on this topic, whether it's prevention or intervention around the United States. Many of the projects that have been evaluated, unfortunately, have not been sustainable financially because either government has changed their priorities or it was a privately funded initiative, and they didn't go beyond 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 years. And so I think we are using, that being said, we're using the best available information that is out there from across the country to try and develop our plan. And I think most of the experts would say that what we are doing is the best in terms of based on what we know now. But we have to create, I think, an environment, which is very difficult for government, I might add, is to actually create a learning environment where as we go and we begin to learn things and we evaluate what we're doing and we find out what works and what doesn't work, we need to sometimes painfully then stop doing what we find out is not working and actually invest those resources more in what we know is working, or try some different approaches. So if in 3 to 5 years from now, if the city of Los Angeles and our office was doing exactly the same thing the same way that we're going to propose to do right now, if we were doing it exactly the same way, I would think we would have failed, because my guess is we will learn. I'm confident we'll learn things along the way, and I think what we want to try and do in our office is create a learning environment where we can learn from what we experience and then make some changes and modifications along the way to do it even better.
Now, on that note, can you give us some examples of some of the resources or data or information that the mayor's office sought out or used or welcomed in order to develop the information you needed to therefore create an RFP like this for intervention?
As you know, the gang reduction program was a federally funded Department of Justice and Office of Criminal Justice Planning funded program in Boyle Heights for the last nearly 3 years now. And that program was done in, I believe, 5 cities around the United States, and had an evaluation that they've done, at least a preliminary evaluation. Actually, Los Angeles was shown to have one of the best programs, actually, of any city in the country in terms of that. So we certainly relied on that. We've also looked at, as I mentioned, particularly as it relates to intervention, to the ceasefire program, which was done in Chicago, and has just had an evaluation that was completed by Northwestern University. And so we reviewed that, particularly as it relates to intervention, and then looked at a number of other studies, as well as we mentioned earlier, we've looked at and talked with lots of folks who have practical experience on the ground here in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Boston, other parts of the country.
Okay. Now, when it comes to whenever a lot of times people look to RFPs as they're black and white. But let me give you an example, or ask you a question, and if you could give me an example or let me know whether or not this would apply. And that is, more than ever, we're going to expect, whether it be the RFPs that went out for prevention or an RFP for intervention or what have you, we're going to expect more feedback, right? We're going to expect more understanding of who's the population that's being served, how much activity is going on, what are the organizations learning out there, how can we improve for future RFP purposes, for future relationships, on how to improve our efforts. But with that comes the intangibles. Like, for example, the city attorney announced that he did formalize a process by which people can formally be removed from a gang injunction as an individual, and that there's actually one person that actually has been removed. So therefore, that's something that a lot of this population that these providers are going to be working with are dealing with. Would these providers be expected to be partners in disseminating information or being help with resources in general in those communities to help communicate what's available to them, where they can get more services, where they can get more resources? Is that like an expectation that I'm expecting that we all envision that whoever are the implementers of the intervention programs in the city are going to be those kinds of organizations where they have that kind of relationship?
Well, the answer to that is yes. I mean, we are certainly, as part of our strategy, as you know, we're in the process of hiring program managers for each one of the 12 gang reduction youth development zones.
No, that's city staff.
That's right. They work for the mayor's office.
Got it.
Part of their role is to actually convene a multidisciplinary team to really look at individual kids and the services, and young adults, that the services they need, but also to convene a community advisory board that really looks at the broader community and the resources that are available. Both our prevention contractors as well as the intervention contractors will be expected to participate in that broader, those broader groups that are looking at the resources available and how to leverage the resources they have with additional resources. So, for example, we're also working with other city departments to bring resources to bear. One that we've been working on quite a bit in the last number of months is with the community development department. We invest probably $40 million a year in our workforce investment system. There's no question that has actually served some gang-involved youth in the past, but I don't think we've had a means by which we could really both target gang-involved or ex-convict youth who might have gang affiliation, and then to actually figure out a referral mechanism by which those young people and young adults get referred into our workforce development system, and then track what happens to them. Do they actually get trained and actually get placed in jobs, and how long do they keep jobs? So we've been working with the community development department to develop a memorandum of understanding that will allocate, the workforce investment board agreed with us this year to set a 10% target, that 10% of all the clients for the work source centers and the one source centers would come from be gang affiliate or gang involved youth. That works out to this year about 500 slots. And so we've now got identified slots in each one of the workforce and work source centers throughout the city. We've aligned those, at least for right now, with the Bridges 2 contractors, and eventually we'll be aligning those with our grid contractors so that there's a referral system where they can actually get them into training. Well, that's a means by which we can leverage additional city resources. We're also working with probation department to work on a reentry project and to target some areas to start, so we can bring some of probation has a substantial amount of resources related to this population. How do we leverage that as well? So we're trying to do that on our end, and we would expect that the agencies that we would fund would participate in that larger community-based collaborative that we're trying to put together with a variety of resources.
So I don't usually take this long to ask questions, but since I'm trying to make sure that we stay within the lines, so we're truly anticipating that the responses to this RFP end up being organizations that show that holistic ability when it comes to not only being responsible for eventually signing a contract with the city specific to this RFP, but also organizations that actually have like a pulse of the community. They're part of the community, or they know how to work well within certain communities.
Well, they're certainly, going to have to be able to work with the broader community, and that's what I said in terms of these broader advisory groups. We would certainly want any intervention group that responds to be able to see themselves a part of this broader thing, because as we mentioned earlier, intervention is not the only part of the solution. There's these other resources that we need to bring to bear on the problem. So I think what we're trying to do is figure out how we create the kind of connection points with both city resources and the ones we're investing and bringing to bear through these RFPs and the agencies will fund, but then also other city resources that get used for a variety of things that we can leverage to work on this issue as well.
Okay. Since the mayor's office most recently, as of July 1st, started taking on this responsibility directly of the prevention and intervention programs within the city, what can you say about perhaps something you've learned in the last few months or what have you that has helped you improve on your process of creating these RFPs? They're not easy. We all know that. But they're a new effort for the mayor's office.
I think, trying to gather as much research and data and information as we can to base it on research. I think sometimes that has been maybe a fault. We haven't done as much as we could. But I also think listening to people who have practical experience as well has contributed to that. I think one of the things I've learned is, having not worked in government before, everything takes longer than I'm used to, and so that's just a challenge in and of itself. That's probably partly the reason for the delay of this RFP for intervention, that we had hoped to get it out sooner, but it just wasn't ready. And our feeling was it was better to delay it for a month than to issue something that we just didn't feel represented the best work we could do as a city.
Okay, good. So you're growing in more ways than one. You actually have today, as you develop this RFP, you actually have more people within the mayor's office working on it than you had 3-4 months ago. You've done your own ramping up, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. Just having more bodies physically than we had the first time.
Dedicated to this.
Dedicated to this. We have not filled every position, but we've filled about 75% of the positions we've allocated for this effort. So, yeah, just having bodies rather than just Mildred and I and an administrative assistant has helped pretty substantially, which is what we had when I first got here 15 months ago.
Yeah, I remember. It's good to see that. I'm glad that you've been able to find the capable individuals that you were looking for. It's not easy. It's kind of specialized work, really. And it's not like people have been building their resumes on this kind of matter for 10 years. It's really been very, very recent. So
we have a good group of people. Our program managers that we've already hired, as well as the policy analysts and senior level staff in our office. I'm proud of every one of them, and they work extremely hard. All the work that goes into creating an RFP like this, it doesn't look like much. It's 50-some pages when it's done, but there was a lot of work and effort that people put into that. So they've done a great job.
Now, an RFP like this, especially when you don't have a blueprint to go by, it's not like you can go to Houston or Chicago or New York or anywhere else and say, you know what, God, they figured this thing out, and obviously it's unique to Los Angeles, and just use that as a blueprint. You really didn't have a blueprint to go off, right?
Yeah, we don't really have a
Created your
blueprint
own.
for any of this stuff. We have some promising ideas and some things that are working some places here in Los Angeles and in other parts of the country, but I think what we're trying to do is create more of a system and create some uniformity across the city so that our efforts are consistent, so then we can learn from that. Because if everything we do is different every place we do it, then it's, we don't really know, is it that the context was different here, or was it the agency that did the work different, or, somebody else implemented a program differently over there. We don't know, exactly why it was. And so, but while certainly recognizing that there's uniqueness in each one, a community, as much as we can to try and provide some uniformity across the city, and then to evaluate that and see what kind of results we get as part of our goal.
So as a result of that, I can only imagine that the final document is something that when you look back will have gone through quite a few revisions before the final document.
Yeah, substantial numbers.
Okay. And conceivably, I would think that should everything go well and you end up contracting with agencies that go on for 2.5 to 3 years or what have you on the first go round, that the subsequent process, there'll be probably some revisions to that, because we will have gone through and have had some practical experiences with this exact process, that there'll continue to be changes.
Yeah, we made some slight modifications, nothing major. Even from the time we issued the first prevention RFP on April 15th, and we made some slight modifications for the version of that went out October 1st a few weeks ago. So, yeah, we learned a few things from that. It was like, in people's responses, you see that in responding to questions, they didn't quite, it wasn't quite clear what we were trying to get from them, and so you make some adjustments along the way.
Okay. Now, when it comes to outreach, so that when all is said and done, when you start getting the responses and you develop a comfort level that the outreach was broad enough, what do you anticipate the avenues of outreach are for people to know that this is out on the streets, and please respond if you're interested, if you think you're qualified, if you want to compete, please do. What are you using? What avenues, what venues?
Well, the primary avenue to do the RFP and to answer questions that people might have along the way, and to provide some technical assistance that we're using, is the city's Los Angeles Business and Virtual Network, LA BAVN. And so that's one way. If people sign up, and anyone who's listening, I encourage them to go to LABAV as in Victory, N as in Nancy.org, and they can actually sign up. It's free. And then what happens is, every time the city issues any kind of RFP, they can say which ones they're interested in, and they'll receive an email electronically notifying them the second we post that RFP. So that's one of the primary ways we'll use that. We also then put it prominently on every time we've issued an RFP on the mayor's website to drive people to that as well. And then we've also both times we've done ads in local community newspapers. So a lot of the more like the Wave and some of the other community-based newspapers that people in neighborhoods might read, as opposed to the LA Times, although we would put stuff in there as well. So we get that out. And then actually, through grassroots networks and emails, and we'll let people know it's coming. And then we'll also do a press release. The first time we did this, it got quite a bit of press, and they let a lot of people found out that way as well. So our press office will push this out, make an announcement that we're releasing this as well. So we'll use a variety of means.
Okay. Good. And then also, I guess I take it for granted that I'm assuming that whoever was engaged and got on the list of interested and or responders to the prevention process, they would be notified as well, right?
Yeah, because we've encouraged at every bidders conference, we've asked people to sign up on LA BAVN, and then since they're already signed up for that, once we issue this, they'll receive that email notification as well.
Okay. And when do you anticipate that the next opportunity for people to hear about this before it's released? The anticipated date is November 5th?
Yeah, next Wednesday.
Is next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any announcements? Anything you anticipate between now and then?
No, we don't have any planned announcements. We'll release it. We'll post it on LA BAVN on our website, and we'll do a press release. And also, we've also notified every time all 15 council offices as well, to let them know, since they often have connections with local constituents as well.
And the anticipated amount of time between the RFP going out and when it's due is 40 days, right?
Yeah, December 15th is the targeted.
Okay. And then also, just so that people understand, government doesn't have the right to shorten the period of time that there is for response. But if something were to trigger or some notification, a mistake or what have you, like say an email address, a website address was down or something, and somebody were to complain, something like that might trigger an extension, a possible extension of the window of time. So I'm just letting everybody know that when government puts out an RFP or an RFQ, there's a minimum amount of time. But as an element of fairness, if there's something that's determined by the entity or agency putting it out, then it could trigger the need to say, okay, we'll give a little bit more time out of an element of fairness. That way, if somebody said, look, I was told, and I use this, I'm going to be generic about it because I use this because there was an actual RFP that a totally different department did in the city, and the department felt just fine, and for some crazy reason, on one of the go-to places, the website was down or something like that, or it omitted the information, but the particular potential respondent actually was only looking at that site, and it for some reason went back up like 2 days before the RFP was due, and they threw their hands up and say, whoa, I was looking for this and I only got 2 days to do it. So when they complained to the city, the department weighed it out carefully and said, you know what, it was the city's fault, that particular department. They didn't even realize their mistake until the last minute. So they gave like a few more days or what have you, and everybody was happy. The reason why I explain that to you is there might be agencies or organizations that may be responding, and this is the first time you actually respond to an RFP period within the government. So if you see something that happens that you think you have a legitimate thing to bring to the table or to the attention of the city, please do. And I must qualify, and we have a city attorney here. I'm not saying that any little thing that you complain about or say what's not fair, that's going to trigger that. But obviously, if it's something that is trackable and identifiable, and then obviously the city attorney's office would be consulted on anything like that, that if it was determined that the satisfaction of the process would be to do, say, a small extension or something like that, then that kind of thing can happen, okay? But it's not automatic. It's not like, well, wait a minute, I don't like the color of paper it was on. That's not a legitimate reason. It's not going to be extended because of that. But if it's something that happened, that the city inadvertently, an accident happened or what have you, that there's an element of legitimate question of fairness, then the city or entity, be it the county, the federal government, state government, in this case the city government, the mayor's office has the opportunity to go ahead and add some extension and therefore bring it back into fairness. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would just say that is possible and it is legal.
Exactly.
It is not probable.
Exactly, but stranger things have happened. We have a blackout and all of our computers go out and we're out for 5 days or something like that. Crazier things have happened. That kind of dynamic could cause that. And that's why I warn people, don't think that if you don't like the color of paper it was on or, this quirky little thing, that's not a reason.
Or I got in an accident in my car on the way to submit it at 5 o'clock on the day it was due, or the parking attendant, trust me, we've already, in just the first two we've done, we heard all kinds of interesting and unique circumstances that occurred to people that caused them to miss the deadline. So I would encourage people, we will accept submissions early. So anyone who would like to, enjoy their weekend, that December 15th date is a Monday. Anybody that would like to enjoy their weekend and wants to turn it into us on a Friday, we'll be happy.
Or Thursday, or Wednesday.
Or any time before, we'll be happy to take that. That's right. I would encourage people to not butt themselves right up against that 5 o'clock deadline.
Exactly. But I thank you for clarifying that, Jeff, because the examples I was using were where the city, for some reason, makes some kind of mistake, or like I said, a blackout or something beyond the city's control. But you gave some examples where the respondents, they got sick or they got a flat tire.
Our dog ate the proposal.
Yeah, exactly. That's not an element of fairness that befalls on the shoulders of the city. that's an element of responsibility of the respondent to do their job and respond on time or even ahead of time. And thank you for reminding me. Just because it says, the 15th of December, and that date is, we adhere to that date and there's no changes, it doesn't mean that if you're done on the 5th of December that you can't come in and turn it in. Don't give the dog 10 more days to eat it up. Don't take that chance. Nobody's asking you to wait till the last minute. Okay.
Indeed.
I know I know that it sounds a little mundane, Jeff, but I'm glad that we were able to have the last few minutes of that dialogue, because it can get a little silly sometimes. But I just want to let people know there are legitimate reasons, but always remember this: usually those reasons are because the actual entity or organization that's putting it out, if something happens on their end, then an extension can occur. But if your dog eats your proposal, it's not on the city. Sorry. We have some public comment cards. First one that came in was Joe Carmona and Noreen McClendon. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, for the record, my name is Joe Carmona, and I am now retired from LA Unified School District. Thank you. And also that I now am a consultant for the Churches of Northeast LA and part of the safety committee for the Neighborhood Council of Highland Park. And some of the concerns that we have are this. We wonder, because Highland Park is basically out of the Cypress Park zone. Yet, whatever happens in Cypress Park will certainly affect us and has traditionally for many years. Who's going to be working with the Avenues, Highland Park, Dogtown, et cetera, all the other little gangs that are around there, especially the Avenues, which is the big one that's sitting right there. That's one of our concerns. The other concern is the people that have been hired, that would be hired as far as gang intervention. Of course, they have to be properly screened. However, the thing that we're concerned with, and I've seen this happen, I'm not talking from a maybe situation, I'm talking about people from the city, from the political part of the city that come in and interfere with some of the agencies that have been hired. And then in turn, those are the very people that in the community that know how to work with these gang kids and deal with that. And that I've seen happen, and we're very concerned about that. The other thing is, as far as a gang intervention, I do believe that gang intervention people, and I've seen some real good ones, but very few in Highland Park. It's a very underserved area. What basically, if we want to get some people working on it, we need more, and please pay them for the extremely dangerous work that they'll be doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is actually. I'm Noreen McClendon. I'm the executive director of Concerned Citizens of South Central Los Angeles, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate, because this is not really a comment. I just had a few questions.
Are you commenting on the items before us, or you wanted to make
Yes.
general comment? Okay, go ahead.
Questions about what was just presented, and I don't know if this is the opportunity to get those answers or not.
Well, one of the things for sure is, regardless, you have the right to ask any question you want.
Okay.
Now, if for some reason it delves into an answer that would deem the process unfair, you're not going to get a response. No disrespect to you, but
Okay.
like I said earlier in the meeting, we don't want to jeopardize the process. But people are taking notes and listening as we have been. The city's been listening for years. The mayor's office just inherited this officially since July 1st. They've been working on it countless hours, et cetera. So whatever it is that you have to say or questions or what have you, we're listening.
Okay. One is my ears perked up when it talked about the level of I wanted to know what level of client data has to be submitted for the people for the contractors. I know they have to submit client data. I was curious about that. I also was curious about who will be conducting the evaluations and what are the qualifications to become an evaluator. And then what constraints are placed on the background of those people that are working under the contracts that are let, and then why was it only 6 months and not a year? I don't know if anybody can answer those or.
Okay. Well, I think the 6 months and not a year is something that's not particular to the RFP. It's just a practical matter of budgeting. So that one we for sure can answer.
Pretty simple.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Jeff, can you come back up, please?
Actually, I think the only one I can answer by the nod from the city attorney is that the 6 month is really a budgetary issue.
So that's just to line it up with the budgetary process?
Right.
Right? Which is, we do it on July 1st, not January 1st. So
Right.
that was just to try to line it up that way.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, client data, you should be able to ask those questions during the bid conference times of November 12th and November 13th. By the way, do you anticipate how long that dialogue window will be on those dates? Is it a 2 hour? 2 hour? Okay, but there's no law against if you're really getting a lot of good questions or what have you, and it's really, all relevant stuff. You could technically go beyond 2 hours if necessary to make more clarification.
Yeah, as long as we have the space. But the other thing is we will actually, at each one of those days, because sometimes you'll get people that ask questions on one session that won't be asked. So what we've done in previous bidders conference, first of all, we tape the whole thing. So there's, the presentation as well as the question and the answers. And then we do we take all the questions down and then compile those and then actually post all the questions that were asked at the bidders conference.
And answers.
As well as our answers on the LA Bavin website. And then what happened is we have an email account at our office where people can submit questions after the fact, and then we actually get those questions and then post answers to those on the LA Bavin website as well. So people can get not only the questions they have, but other questions that other people might have as well. They can get the benefit of that.
So, and also understand the dates. The bidders conference or the dialogue opportunity for those individuals and or organizations who plan on responding to this process, it's going to be released on November 5th. And if you look at the 12th and the 13th of November, that means 7 to 8 days later, there's going to be an opportunity. What I hope you do, for example, is on November 5th, you get it, or first thing November 6th, and you start looking through it, highlighting it, make photocopies, write all over it. So when you come to the conference, you can actually ask a bunch of your questions. And it doesn't mean that because you ask a question that the city attorney is going to allow that question to be answered directly, because that might be something, unfortunately, that is inherent in the process, and you have to respond however you're going to respond when you put your response in writing, hopefully. And then so what happens is after this
Although
bidders...
I do think most of the questions that people asked at the bidders conference, we did answer.
Yeah.
Either directly or if we didn't have the information right then, we would post those at some point. So,
But I want to be careful to warn people that just because they ask a particular question doesn't mean that that every single question can be answered.
Sure.
Luckily, last time, all the questions that were asked fell within the purview of giving those answers, and you were able to do that. But I'm not a lawyer, and a lot of people responding aren't lawyers. A lot of not-for-profits can't afford lawyers, so they just ask the questions however they come to their mind. So I just want to let people know that it's going to be a respectful process, it's going to be an open process, and at the same time, whatever questions you ask, like last time with the prevention RFP process, all the questions that were asked were answered and responded to, either there and or on the website. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct.
So that we anticipate will happen again, right, Jeff?
indeed.
Okay.
Yes.
But if the city attorney says, I'm sorry, that's already in the RFP, that is already in there, there's nothing else we can say about that without tainting the process, right?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Richard Bob from the City Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
I
Put the
thought
mic a little closer.
I thought that after the last question, comment, perhaps I should explain why.
Please.
Today's meeting is to just generally discuss the RFP. It's not to get into specifics. Once the RFP is released, a lot of your specific questions will be answered because it'll be right there in the RFP. And then if it's not in the RFP, there will be a specific process whereby everybody gets the responses at the same time. So that ensures fairness. See, the problem is not everybody can be here today. And because not everybody can be here today, we don't want to get into any of the specifics. So that's why I've advised everybody to just keep it general. Once the RFP is released, I believe that the mayor's office will be able to answer all the questions. The only possibility would be if there was a vagueness that was ambiguous and the mayor's office had to, give out further information to clarify. Thank you.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Bob, what that means is, if, for example, somebody comes up with a very interesting, clever, technical question that actually could improve the process, and the thing is, I respect the fact, Jeff, that you don't want people to feel encouraged that this is going to go on forever, that oh, we're going to extend it through the 20th, then we're going to extend it through I understand that. But the thing is, I've been through enough of these things at the state level and the city level and watching these things happen that what I want the public to understand is always know that this process, we want it to be as fair as possible. And Mr. Bob, if something comes up in that process where it triggers some kind of incredible clarification that you might even get involved in responding a full page, that could actually be some kind of addendum to the process if it were that deep.
Absolutely. RFPs have been known to change during the process. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So the reason why I say that is because only someone like you or something that I've witnessed, when you see that happen, it's rare. But when you see that happen, it makes all the sense in the world why an addendum may have to be made or what have you. And then all of a sudden everybody has to be fairly noticed in order for it to continue to be fair from that point forward. Because the last thing anybody wants to do is make major changes after the RFPs have been awarded, because that's a whole other story. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We have another public comment card. Is it on this item or general public comment? This item? Is it Maya? I'm sorry, Maya? I'm sorry, I'm not going to butcher your name. I'll let you say it.
All right. I'm Maya Trochimczyk, Planning Director of Phoenix House. And I was wondering, in general, this new RFP system replaces LA Bridges program, and that program had a number of providers across town. So are all these providers in the system of cooperations are going to be completely thrown out and replaced with the new ones, or can they reapply under the new program? Phoenix House has no interest. We have not had Bridges grants, so it's not from my perspective for my agency, but in general informing coalitions with other agencies that were already offering these services. Are all of them discredited and thrown out, or are
Well, I
they
wouldn't use the
thrown in?
word discredit.
Well, I mean, it's obviously there's one program replacing another means
Sure.
that the previous one didn't work. So is the assumption that all of the providers under the previous program didn't do the job right, or is it possible for them to do the job better? And the second issue is completely different. I was wondering about the time frame for potential RFPs for non-grid zones, both prevention and intervention. When are these services to be commenced, and when are the RFPs to be released, if this is possible to know? Thank you.
Okay. On the first one, Bridges 1 and Bridges 2 as we know it, and Bridges 1 and Bridges 2 as titles of program in the city of Los Angeles are going to be gone. Anything else you'd like to add to that? But the Bridges 1 and Bridges 2 contracts are being phased out on a set date, and that'll occur. But on the second question...
Yeah, well, I'm just going to stay up here. The
Yeah, please do.
Bridges 1 and Bridges 2 will phase out as of December. Well, Bridges 1 will phase out as of December 31st.
Bridges
Assuming
2.
that the City Council approves our request for an extension for 3 months, Bridges 2 will continue for an extra 3 months. Any organization that is deemed qualified based on the general parameters of the RFP, they're a 501c3, they're in good standing, they can apply for these funds. Certainly their ability to perform the contract and to perform the work that was specified in the RFP will be part of how they're evaluated. But we're not suggesting that, no, we're not suggesting there are some people who can't apply for this and some people who cannot apply. The second thing related to the non-grid RFP, our plan right now is to release it on the same day, on November 5th, for both prevention and intervention on that day as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That concludes the public comment cards for this committee. Is anybody else here to make public comment on item number 1? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 1 is now closed. With that, item number 1, there's no action to take on item number 1. It's an informational item. And once again, I'd like to thank Jeff Carr from the mayor's office and all of his support staff. Thank you very much for coming forward today and providing us with this information. Thank you, Mr. Bob from the city attorney's office, for making sure we stayed within the lines. Did we do okay? Okay, good. Okay, with that, we have general public comment for this committee is now open. I do not see any general public comment cards to this committee. Seeing and hearing no general public comment to this committee, general public comment is now closed. With that, this committee is now adjourned.